Welcome back to another episode of Twisted Metal Companion. You guys, I'm really excited about this one. We have another interview, this time with costume designer Liz Vastola joining us. How are you doing, Liz?
I'm so well. How are you, Peter?
I am doing great. You're one of the first people, part of the crew that I had started following. So we definitely, Tyler's not here, but I definitely want to speak to you about obviously the look of the characters. But before we do that, let's get to know about you a little bit. Born and raised in New York, right?
Yes,
And I
yes.
know some of your early stuff you dabbled in some theater, but where did your love for some costume design, like where did that love come from? Is that something you were always interested in growing up? Is that something you knew you wanted to do after school?
Well, I would say in high school I started to really develop an interest in fashion and pursued it in a kind of like extracurricular way. Took some, high school classes and sketching and design and just sort of being in and around New York. That was also its own education and clothing and dress practice and um I went to school for English, Lit, and Art History, but I continued to participate in costume design and kind of get my feet wet a little bit with it, on the side. And it was something that um I only was aware of having kind of grown up going to theater with my parents and really putting that one-to-one equation together of like, oh, you can be interested in narrative and storytelling in English, art history, and also be interested in fashion history and in clothing. And, that plus that equals costume design. And so it was something that I only really considered as a career as throughout college. I also went to college in the city. Tried to work with or intern for professional costume designers to see what that world was like. And it really, as I kept going, I kind of just said to myself when I graduate, I'm just going to go for it. I'm going to try this kind of slightly, esoteric, specific career and see what happens. And I really haven't looked back since.
So would you credit like the theater as like kind of the early inspiration into that field?
For sure. I think that, especially in New York, I think the access to theater at any level is really it's just everywhere. You could in the early 2000s you could be a part of a really low budget underground off Broadway production and flex your costume design muscle, and it just felt to me more accessible at an entry level than film or television or motion picture because there was this sort of um, just really pervasive underground theater world that existed. And I think prior to, film and TV and motion picture feeling more accessible to people through, their phones and being able to capture, video at, as any person, you didn't have to have a camera, with you, prior to that blow up of the film and TV scene, I think theater was definitely the first kind of environment that was a really compelling outlet for costume design for me.
Yeah, your craft, I really enjoyed the look of people. I was just off mic here. I told you that I just spoke with Stacy, and I
Yes,
just I love the detail that goes into everything that we see. It's not always just about like the story and like what's going on. It's like the clothing, like those tell a certain story as well. And like in
for
Twisted
sure.
Metal post-apocalypse. It's been a couple decades, and what does one own in that time? Did they have more than one wardrobe? So it tells a story on its own as well. You have done other work, so for like the comic book fans, you've done Jessica Jones and like Daredevil as well. So you
Mhm.
have adapted fictional characters on screen as well, and kind of helped out with their look. When you booked Twisted Metal, based off of a video game, obviously the end product, right? When all these images came up, people were pretty excited. I don't know if anyone sat there and like, I don't know about that particular look. But did you
Yeah.
feel any pressure? Did you see this as a challenge into like what would the gamers and the fandom think about your style or your vision of these characters?
Oh, 100%. I mean, I, you know, I think that the relationship that gamers have with certain games, with certain IPs. I mean, it's communal and that people can now, go on subreddits or, sites and chat with each other, go to, cons, etc. But it's also very personal and it's very individual. And most of the time, a lot of games you're playing either with either one other person or nobody else, and you're just kind of like chilling by yourself, and you're creating this own, you're stepping into this very creative and world that has been set up for you. And it's often something that starts in people's childhoods and teen years. And so there's that element of it as well. I mean, I know this because I, would consider myself a gamer growing up as well. And it's no different from reading books or watching movies or any kind of, art form where you're invited to kind of step into the world yourself. And so because of that, there's a ton of pressure, and you want to, on the one hand, live up to people's expectations, but on the other hand, you also need to be truthful to the story that's being told now. You have to work with, in our case, Michael Jonathan Smith and the writers and the actors and everyone who's telling the current version of the series. That's what you're most responsible to, I think. But you also always want to keep the fans in mind because the community that's around Twisted Metal, much like a lot of different fandoms, is really strong and really passionate. And, you know, there hasn't been much activity with Twisted Metal from a creative standpoint since I think it was 2012 was the last game, I think. And so, we're talking about over 10 years later, I understand the trepidation and the excitement around it. And the best you can do is do as much research as you can, be as faithful to the series, in places that, as possible, but then as well, make sure you're working within, the newly created world that's inspired by it. Because I think if you step one, too far in either direction, you're doing both sides a disservice. You know what I mean?
Right. So you got to find like a good balance of like honoring
For
the
sure.
original look, but also making things a little bit more practical. Some of the characters may have like a certain aesthetic to them. It's like, well, that doesn't really exist in our world, because it's a
For
video game.
sure.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I really like that. So let's dive into Twisted
Sure.
Metal. Yeah, so our leads, John Doe, Quiet, and this kind of when we I guess talk about Quiet, this we could lump in Loud as well. So can you talk about the process of like when you book the show and then you start talking about these characters, you get scripts in advance and kind of try to get an understanding of what you how you have to envision like certain communities and stuff ahead of time?
Yeah, you have the scripts in advance. You talk about the general vibe and tone, the amount of, from not only a story standpoint, but also from pretty much a fine art standpoint, the level of color that, the creators are interested in expressing. You're talking about what the future story is going to look like and how that's going to affect what you prepare for their costumes. But you know what's so funny about Twisted Metal, and I think is so apropos and also specific to this project, is that we also were able to see what the cars were going to look like ahead of
Mm.
time.
Oh wow,
And
okay.
yeah, and
Yeah.
that is so important. You know, we really, because of the foundation of the game, I mean, we all felt that it was important to think about these characters' costumes in relation to their vehicles, not only from a, like, okay, well, this is a driving game, but also from the standpoint of, I think the characters are thinking about their vehicles in the same way they're thinking about their clothes, in
Mm.
that it's especially for the characters that are out on the road, it's a form of protection. It's a form of self-expression. It's part of, who they want the world to envision them as. And there's also a utility to it, so, especially, with, John and of course, quiet and loud with the hearse. I mean, we were very aware of their color palettes and how that would play into what they wear. John, of course, Evelyn, before we have Roadkill, Evelyn is orange and black and is very warm toned inside, whereas Quiet is the hearse is purple and black, more cool toned. And we wanted to make sure their ensembles, went with that.
So John Doe, can you talk about like the decision into his look, right? He's got like this vest, the cargo pants and the high C shirt. I couldn't find a high C shirt online. The decision into that shirt in particular.
Yeah, so well, John is a milkman and they are essentially delivery people. And um so when we meet milkmen down the line, we see more of this as well. There has to be a kind of a layering to their costume. There has to, the cargo pants, the vest, there needs to feel like there's pockets, there's places for things to go. There's also a way in which John can hide his weaponry under his vest and with, the harness that he wears. So I think there's a practicality to it. And there needed to be a feeling of practicality to his look. There's also elements to what he's wearing that directly harken back to the late 90s and early 2000s. I mean, of course, cargo pants for men during the 90s and the early 2000s were it,
I may still have
so
some.
you still have them. They're coming
Yeah.
back around, but I don't know if you remember when they like first landed on the scene. I mean, it was like, it's just such a departure from the late 80s and the early 90s. It's such a hallmark of that period. So, it really made sense to me that he wore cargo pants. And then the high C shirt, so we knew through illustration and conversation and research that we felt like a golden color t-shirt was going to be appropriate for him. It just felt like a good color for John for a lot of reasons. The olive jacket also references his olive shirt in the game.
Mm.
Um, but something about the gold for me just really felt like a beacon, wherever he is, he's number one, and he's someone that the story will literally and figuratively follow. And so I really like that idea, but I wasn't I I thought it would be interesting to try and work in some sort of logo into that, so it's not just a plain gold tee,
Right.
that so there's something behind it that's motivating him wearing it. And high C to me just felt like first of all, it correlated with the color, their
Mm,
branding. It also, was just one of those brands to me that really kind of encapsulates like the 90s, the that sort of like big dog, no fear, high C, like very kind of like expressive brand. I also like the energy that, even um just the wording brings to it and a little bit of humor there. And much to our surprise, they were very game.
good.
I mean, we created that t-shirt from scratch and we needed to make sure, of course, we needed High C and Coca-Cola to sign off on it. And we made sure the logo was the appropriate logo from the time period. And I also like that it's not always in your face. It's obscured by the Vastola, but it's still there as kind of a cheeky moment. And and we went with it.
Yeah, yeah, that stuff sticks with me. Like, I'm gonna, it's hard not to ever reference Cobra Kai just because of, MJ's
Of
involvement, and
course.
that's
Yeah.
why I started Twisted Metal in the first place. But so with that show, Coors Banquet, right? Like Coors
Yeah.
was, so excited about their use of like, oh, the lead is drunk and often and is drinking the Coors, but with the success of that show. Was like, okay, maybe it was not a bad idea entirely. But like it's watching Twisted Metal. I was like, I need a high C shirt. That's
Yeah.
what I came away from that, and I'm looking for more Jordans online. So
Yes.
that's the thing with TV and film. I see something, and it's credit to like people like you and your team that make us want to buy these things. And I don't think it's capitalized on enough.
Yeah. And I love that. And also, I mean, it's really interesting to me how, maybe less now than in previous past like 2 decades. I feel like maybe branding currently is a little bit is almost on the down the down trajectory. But especially in the 90s, the 2000s, 2010s, I mean, it's so hard to go out into public and not see brands on shirts.
Right.
And but on screen, on camera, it's often um it's shied away from for a lot of different reasons, and a lot of them very, of course there's business reasons, but there's also just like aesthetically, I get it, and I've um of course done quite a few projects with zero branding, anywhere. But I just felt like it's such a good linchpin. It's such a good sort of like audience resting place to sort of to see a brand shirt that I don't think, John probably likes that shirt because if he feels very comfortable in it and it fits him, and like I don't think and maybe he drank high C as a kid and like whatever, he just picked it up off the side of a road basically. But it just, for a show that is where the clothing is really based on late 90s, early 2000s, it just felt like a brave choice, like a move to just to have a shirt that has a brand in it as opposed to just a sea of blankness. You know what I mean? Without any, he has the Got Milk sticker on his bumper. Like there's branding everywhere, and it's, in the production design, and it's done and in the script, and it's done in such a thoughtful way. And I'm glad to have contributed to that in the as subtle as I could.
Yeah. Yeah, like I don't know how things work when it comes to like rights and you just mentioned how like I see and Coke had to be or Coca-Cola had to be okay with that. And so but yeah, just to talk about the mall scene real quick, we see Anchor Blue, somewhere I shop.
Totally.
I too am a kid of the 90s. I love the 80s, but in high school, I remember everybody wanted to wear a Gap shirt that said Gap. Nobody wants to wear a Gap
Yeah,
shirt that you couldn't see the word Gap on it. A&E,
a
Abercrombie and
hundred
Fitch.
percent.
We wanted to see those logos. That's how you knew that you were a teen that had some money, or at
Yeah.
least, knew somebody that was able to afford those things for you. So nobody wants anything plain. But now as we're getting older, I don't know if the styles were changing or we're like, well, that's so synonymous with like a specific age group. And
Yeah,
you know, like I feel in their 20s, you know, graphic tees were a thing, and now I feel like yeah, the plain colored shirts are kind of maybe it's my age, you know, that I feel I'm wearing
yeah,
less, you know, logos and stuff.
yeah,
So
yeah,
nostalgia,
exactly. Yeah.
yeah. With Quiet, she wears a jacket that we originally saw on Loud. Can you talk about that look?
Sure. So, um, I knew from basically the get-go that that a jacket was going to be an important storytelling point. It
Mm.
was, in the script that Loud had, had quite a distinct jacket, and it was going to be something that Quiet was going to take and carry with her, literally on her back, as a way to kind of take her brother with her. And so, we knew that the jacket needed to be I mean, literally loud, like, some kind of non sequitur, like uh specific dropped into this landscape style jacket that that felt like something that was that felt appropriate for Loud, and that he would just, have it as sort of an act of rebellion almost, to be wearing that kind of jacket is a real sort of like F you to anybody that's like trying to take him down that he's able to conquer. There's also like a sort of theatricality to the jacket. It feels like something almost historical. It could even dip into something that he stole from the back of the theater. Like it just has this sort of like other environment feel to it. And Quiet embracing it for herself. I mean, it's it starts as something that's like a hindrance that's encumbers her in a way of just being something that a way that she's carrying her brother with her, that and but not really dealing with the loss. You know what I mean? It's kind of like it's a stand-in for grief in a way. And then it becomes something, and I really think that the moment that it comes into its own for her is towards the end, in the last episode when we see her tricked out with like her, her hatchets and her knife and her, she ends up having this harness across her chest, and at that point the jacket really feels to me like a second skin for her. But it really is this sort of like it's kind of like incredible the amount of storytelling I think that's baked into the piece, and how it needs to sort of feel at one, it needs to feel right on Loud, and then kind of sort of a presence on Quiet, and then ultimately become something that really just feels that she's then grown into and has decided to take with her.
Now, John Doe was a character from the game, but obviously this version of John Doe, I think, you know, maybe the name was probably the most game thing that they took from it because like the story is different as far as I know
Oh
because the
yeah.
video game he's a former FBI agent I believe so Sweet Tooth is obviously what people think of when they hear the game Twisted Metal or the name Twisted Metal. Can you talk about the discussion into that look?
Yeah. So Um, we knew that Sweet Tooth, and it's funny because the Sweet Tooth look was basically our grounding moment in the show. I mean, and to have that look be your your baseline, like this clown with a harness and a mask and crazy hair. I mean, it that sort of set the tone for what we were had to do. But we knew that we were going to do a set of looks, not only his, his regular look, his hero look, which is the harness and the polka dot pants, but also the suit that he wears in the casino scenes. We knew we were going to just completely recreate what was from the game. If there was one thing, that costume in the game that set of costumes is so specific and so, just special in its own way. That clown and clown costumes become, once they're created within an IP, they become iconic. I mean, you just sort of, you think about Pennywise, you think about like the clown costumes are their own world. And so for me to come into this series and decide that I'm going to riff, that I'm going to do something different and not pay my respect to the Sweet Tooth costumes from the game, I think would be an overstep. So, and that was not just my decision. Of course it came from, Peacock and Sony and MJ. We really wanted to recreate Sweet Tooth from the game, with Joe, with Samoa Joe, and of course Will. And so, but there's a lot of questions you have to answer with that. I mean, how are we making these pants? How are these pants coming to Sweet Tooth in our world? Of course, in the game, he's Needles Kane, but, how is this mask coming to him? How is he making this harness? Like, where is it all coming from? So how do I motivate the realism of this costume? And that really was our main task. And we had to ask ourselves, what are these pants? Are they clown pants? Are they mechanic pants? Are they, are they a lightweight cotton? Are they a drill, very heavyweight, canvas material? All those kinds of questions, had to come up and be answered in order for us to really properly situate that costume in the world. And, uh, and of course the whole thing had to be created from scratch. We were
Okay.
we even tried at one point. I mean, one of my behind the scenes photos that I've posted on social media is of a pair of white jeans, that are Levi's, which are incredible that they still sell for men. Um and we just to kind of get a sense of what this looks like in contemporary retail. And as soon as we got those in, I was like, all right, we're making these pants. Like,
Yeah.
this can't be contempo casual, Sweet Tooth. We have to really get in here on a very specific studied level.
So I bring this up not to be funny because I am curious, and I don't know it's going to be you or prop, but the creator of the games, Twist Metal, David Jaffe, he was very excited to see the inclusion of Harold, the paper sack.
Yes.
Are you able to speak on that, or is that prop?
That's more props.
Okay.
And I'm not sure if you're in touch with Mike, but that would be a great conversation as well. But yeah, there are a lot of those kind of. I'm so glad that he responded well to that, and yeah, just a stroke of genius, I think, on MJ and all the writers' point. You
For
know,
including Harold, yeah.
for including Harold. Yeah,
You got to include the paper sacks. They need
yeah,
some love too. There's not enough of them on on screen. At least not with
for sure.
with at least one without like a 40 ounce in it or something. So
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
yeah, yeah. So another video game character that people were really excited about, not only with the casting, but the fact that this person was in it, Raven, played by
Yes.
Neve Campbell. A lot of people really appreciated her necklace, which so the game is pretty much a blind spot for me. Like I remember playing the first two, but that's it. I don't remember any other details. So the necklace is something I didn't catch, the first time, and you don't see it until I believe in a later scene. So can you talk about the look of Raven?
Sure. So Raven was someone who, that character, their access to clothing, their ability to upkeep clothing, their ability to change clothes and have different looks was very different and an important thing to communicate to the audience. You know, it's just a very different world than the people who are able to live behind walled cities and have access to, you know, laundry and even maybe dry cleaning and taking care of their clothing and living in this sort of alternate world. You know, it was important for us to set that up against the, you know, the other world of John and Quiet and, you know, Sweet Tooth, and they're, you know, very kind of distressed and, you know, uh less clean, let's say. And so, but of course, Raven in the game is a I mean, I guess you could term it gothic teenager, you know, and wears black, and that we needed to figure out a way, I think, to sort of bring that energy, but and pay homage to her, the version of her in the game, but then, of course, work first and foremost in the world that is created in the show. So, you know, she operates differently and has a different sort of different character than the series, and so, but without, you know, I think it's interesting because I think it was probably a shock for people to see her in white and to see her in something that felt, you know, tailored and fashionable and also luxurious. Um, and when they had only previously known that character in black, you know, black bustier, black dress. Um, but the reveal is that she's using that outfit as a ruse, basically, in order to kind of lull John into this world. And instead, in actuality, when we see her in the later episode, and she's wearing darker clothing, and she hasn't, you know, she hasn't abandoned her sense of style and her sense of authority in how she dresses, but we do reveal that, you know, much in like as she was in the game, she has a predilection for, you know, for darker colors.
Right.
And
Yeah.
yeah, the necklace, I mean, of course, her necklace from the game, um, and she is wearing it in the first episode, but it's hard to see, and kind of on purpose. I mean, it's subtle, you know, it's not black, it's silver. It's something, again, we had to create. Um, but you know, we wanted to keep that element in to make sure people knew that we know where she comes from. You know, we know who Raven is in the series, and we want to bring part of that with her, but also be, you know, work within the current show.
The more characters from the video game, we have Agent Stone. I believe Shepard's
Yeah.
also a character. And so can you talk about the law enforcement and you know, they actually look like a group of law enforcement and not just like, you know, individuals that they were able just to recruit and have their own kind of look.
Yeah, that's funny that you say that because we uh we wanted to make sure, so Stone specifically, uh he has, I mean, obviously a very bright blue costume, and it's based off of you know, his blue uniform that he wore, you know, his origin story that he wore when, you know, at the start of the, let's say, you know, the apocalypse.
Hmm.
And it's, you know, so we wanted to build that through line of something that he hung on to all these years, you know, his own authority and his own color really in the world. And the attitude that we had towards his group, the lawmen, was that, you know, okay, so he keeps his uniform and he keeps his space, um, authentic and similar to where he's come from. But the people that he collects as he goes, you know, and sort of recruits into his world, perhaps they operate on you know, a dress code basis. And so it's not as if Stone has, you know, a whole cache of uniform shirts, but actually the the dress code is to just come in beige. Come in beige, come in khaki. That might be a t-shirt, it might be a button-down shirt, it might be a polo. And then we'll give you the bulletproof vest and you're on your way. The only, and some folks have uh, um elements to their lawman costume that might feel more law enforcement-esque, and some folks look like they just, like stepped right out of Target. And that's the point. And that allows us too to sort of pick out certain members of the lawmen and elevate them. So of course, Carl and Jamie, who are from the game and who we dressed very similar to the way in which they were dressed in the video game series. They wear black, but they're still a part of his group, and that's able to kind of offset them from everybody else. I think the same goes for Agent Shepard. Um, and yeah, that's kind of how we approach that. And I think that we really, I think it adds a little bit to, it's a nice sort of foil to the other costumes in the show that are very, very done, like very sort of loud and brash and real looks. It's nice to, I think, have a population of characters that don't have that same attitude towards what they're wearing, that are just sort of like, all right, we showed up to be a part of this and we've got our beige outfit on and we're good to go.
Yeah, I just love what you said because this is a great transition into Mike and Stu, who are, security guards, and that's,
Yeah.
Stone sees that and pegs them for that, and so that all makes sense. So, Mike and Stu, who look nothing like their video game counterparts,
Right.
obviously, and I love what the show did with these characters. Yeah, I think a fan favorite duo, Mike and Stu. What
Yeah,
can you share
I
about their
love
look?
them, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, and the plaid shirt that Stu wears towards the end is definitely a reference to his video game plaid shirt.
Mm.
And there was a moment I think where we were thinking about bringing their colors from the game, but I think that it was a good departure in that we felt the energy of those characters from the game through the writing, through the acting, and it was okay that costume really just sort of took a back seat and allowed them to, what they wore was a good indicator of who they were in the world, as opposed to taking that purple and that green color and just, automatically assigning it to them. But their costumes in the finale and towards the end of the season when they're out of uniform definitely subtly reference the game.
Okay, so this next one is going to be for my co-host Tyler. Haggard Loner. He wants the jockstrap mask. Uh, he hopes that they become available after the success that is Twisted Metal.
You
Um,
know what is so funny about that is those masks, they're, vintage gas masks, really lent themselves strangely easily into becoming jockstrap. Like there's something really kind of like part of the reference, but kind of phallic about those
yeah,
masks.
yeah,
And the way in which, and that just became that was a much easier task than we thought it was going to be.
good.
Was really interesting.
Oh yeah, yeah. For more talk about that, if for those that maybe missed Stacey Perry interview, we spoke a lot about Mr. Slam's. Like if you want the
Yeah,
phallic talk,
yeah,
we talked about Mr. Slam's members. Because she
yes,
shared a very nice picture too. There's a couple characters I'm gonna save if we're able to kind of fit them in. I want to kind of talk a little bit more about the look of like some groups. The vultures, right? So vultures, that's what they're called on the show, and I feel a lot of like post-apocalyptic movies and television shows, they have their versions of vultures. So when coming up with their look, is there any kind of like mindful decision into not making them look like any other communities on other shows or anything like that? You guys want them to look as
yeah.
original?
That's so interesting you bring them up because they we really went through a lot of different concepts for the vultures. I think there were times where we were thinking of how we could work in the look of an actual vulture. Should there be something about them that feels bird-like? Is there something about them where they all have like a vulture claw, or is there something about the way their costume is gives them kind of a wing-like thing. I mean, we really went through and that's where, our development process, having that time and that space to be creative really helped. But ultimately where we landed, and working really close with the prop department as well,
Hmm.
is that thinking about them as, the act of being a vulture and sort of taking what has been killed and kind of us, using it for yourself. And it lent itself so well to this idea of like picking apart car parts, and
Hmm.
especially given the subject matter of the show. So, a lot of their costumes, feature kind of like messed up tires and rubber and, um, things that feel like demolished, car pieces that they can then work in as protection to what they're wearing. And then, um, uh, go, kind of going off of that idea, underneath those pieces, we had, kind of like patchwork denim and patchwork leather and nothing, I hope that felt too designed, because of course not, some people in this world are really looking at their clothes as, designed, and some people aren't. And I don't think the vultures are, but I do think that that kind of impetus to pick up pieces and assemble them together on your body, and use that as, protection and fill in, as a way of existing. We definitely wanted to work that into how they looked. And I think that, and not go too far into Mad Max territory or into, something that felt steampunky or, or too done up. And all of those things, I mentioned them with like the utmost respect. I just think that this group, was different, in our world, and really kind of a good expression, I think, visually, of what the Twisted Metal world is about,
Absolutely.
which is just like badass people in their cars trying to get by.
Yeah, I really do think each community looks so unique that I can't be like, oh, they kind of remind me of this group from this other show or movie, you know? So they
Yeah.
all really stand out. Just maybe a couple of the different individuals, if we can fit them in real quick.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
Pizza Boy was like I couldn't stop hearing about this guy, and when people started talking about him, I was like, who is that? You know, because they saw just a frame of the guy in one of the trailers. So I was like, this guy's a blind spot for me. And just to put the side by side, you guys even recreated his T-shirt and gave it that
Yeah, why
worn
not?
look. Yeah, that's amazing. So can you talk about that jacket and that character?
Yeah, I love how this show, really at times, and it's really for in service of the fandom and in service of, just having respect for the original design of the show. There were moments like, Sweet Tooth to a certain extent, but also to Pizza Boy, or, as we called him, Connor, like where we just did it. We just did one to one. We just were like, this is what he looked at like in the game. So let's do everything we can to bring him to the screen and have him look that way. And we can't, we're not at liberty to do that all the time, but when we can do it, why not? Um, and that design from the game was also felt so late 90s, so early 2000s. And there was something, there's comedy in it. I mean, how impractical is it to have a red puffy, down jacket in this environment? But
Yeah.
like, whatever, that's okay. That's that kind of like, um, just sort of fun element to it, I think is totally appropriate in costume design, and shouldn't be something that people are, like, oh man, is it going to look ridiculous? Well, you know, it might, but that, like it's okay. People can, have a laugh at it and also understand that, oh, that's the pizza boy from the game, and here he is in the Milkman bar. Like, cool. I see that. So, yeah, we printed the shirt. We found a ton of red down jackets and tried them. And I mean, this one to us felt, the be like the best. And I think that actor really, really was able to pull it off.
Yeah, whether he returns or not for season two, I mean that character in itself is almost an Easter egg, just because it's
Yeah.
just from the way people were reacting to seeing him at all, just like what? And so yeah,
Yeah,
I think that's the right decision is to make him look like the game because
totally.
like he was just in the one scene, so like you do anything different, I think people would more talk about like why did he look like that? Just for like that little
Yeah.
bit. Why did they change the look anyway? How are we on time? We gotta
Well, I actually have
get
to go
going.
in like 1 minute, but
Okay,
I'm happy to pick this up with you at another time, or if you think about other people, or like
absolutely.
I'm always I'm about it. So,
Okay. So let's
yeah.
end with this. Where can people follow you if they want to check out more of the things that you post? Because I love them and I reshare anything that you post.
Yeah, thank you. And you are basically our online encyclopedia. So I
I'm
I
learning.
yeah, I really, really appreciate it. I mean, Instagram at Liz Vastola, and I'm also on the TikTok trying to share there as well. And it's been great all the behind the scenes that people have been able to post and share, and I think that's such a fun part of it for people who are fans of the show.